She was told she had 6 months left to live and kept singing for 3.5 years. One man originated one of the most covered love songs in pop history and never got $1 for writing it.
Rain against my window.
One woman was baking bread in a college cafeteria the week she became one of the most played voices in America. 10 artists, 10 songs, 1 shot each at forever. If you've ever wondered why the perfect record was never followed by another, subscribe now, because we're about to show you what the industry never wanted you to know. And at the very end, we'll meet the woman who sang her children's names into a song about dying and called it love. The countdown begins now. Number 10, Robert Knight, Everlasting Love. A chemistry lab at Vanderbilt University, fluorescent lights, the hiss of a Bunsen burner, a radio left on in the corner where a British band is finishing the final notes of a love song. Nobody in that lab realizes it was written for the man in safety goggles instead of a spotlight. That man is Robert Knight. That song started as his. By 1967, 22-year-old Knight had already survived a broken vocal group and a 4.5-year contract dispute that legally silenced him. A Nashville producer finally handed him a song called Everlasting Love. Knight thought the B-side was stronger. He was wrong, and about to find out how wrong, in the most bittersweet way an artist can. Everlasting Love climbed to number 13 on the Hot 100, number 14 R&B, in the fall of 1967. It should have opened a career. Instead, it opened a door for everyone else. Within months, a British band called Love Affair rode their own version to number 1 in the UK, holding Knight's original at number 40. 7 years later, Carl Carlton's 1974 remake did the same thing in America, climbing to number 6. Here's the twist almost nobody knows. Knight never wrote a word of it. He couldn't stop it from becoming one of only 2 songs to crack the American Top 40 in 4 separate decades, and the only song ever to do it in the UK across 5. Gloria Estefan charted with it. U2 recorded it. Every version borrowed the phrasing Knight invented, the way he slowed the rhythm until the words ached instead of rushed. Every version made someone else rich. By his 40s, Knight wasn't touring arenas. He was a chemistry lab technician at the same university where he'd once studied during the years his contract kept him silent, teaching classes, working the grounds crew, singing his one hit at the occasional oldies review, then going home to a life that had nothing to do with a song still playing somewhere in the world every hour of every day. Robert Knight shaped nearly every phrase later singers would borrow on a song that outlasted 5 decades of the charts. And because his name never touched the songwriting credit, he spent the back half of his life mixing chemical solutions 3 miles from a stage where strangers kept getting rich off the sound of his own voice. Robert Knight lost his song to other people's voices. Our next artist never lost his voice. The industry just made sure almost nobody kept listening to what it was actually saying. Number 9, Billy Paul, Me and Mrs. Jones.
Me and Mrs. Jones.
A stage, decades after the fact. Billy Paul, silver-bearded, thick glasses catching the light, closes his eyes before the first note, because he knows exactly what's coming. A song about another man's secret affair, sung for the 1,000th time by a man faithfully married to the same woman for decades.
We got a thing.
Paul was 37 when Me and Mrs. Jones finally made him famous in 1972, after 2 decades of dues that started in the 1950s, singing in an early lineup of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, financing his own jazz record with his wife Blanche's savings, because no label would take the risk. The song hit #1 on both the pop and R&B charts. It won him a 1973 Grammy over Ray Charles and Curtis Mayfield. Here's what almost nobody remembers. Producers Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff didn't just hand Paul a hit. They handed him their most dangerous material. Songs confronting mass incarceration. 2 centuries of black history compressed into 8 minutes. A 1976 cover that opened with a sample of Malcolm X's own voice, among the first times his words were used on a pop record. Paul's 1973 album, War of the Gods, 6 sprawling genre-bending song suites he later called the best work of his life, stalled at number 12 on the R&B album chart and number 110 on the pop chart. Its lead single, Thanks for Saving My Life, only reached number 37 pop.
Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Jones.
Mrs. Jones played on oldies radio forever. The album Paul was proudest of never found an audience. Listeners wanted the affair. They didn't want the harder truths Gamble, Huff, and Paul were trying to tell them underneath it.
She'll go her way, and I'll go mine.
He performed Me and Mrs. Jones until the year he died at 80 of pancreatic cancer, a song about infidelity, sung for over 40 years by a man who never once cheated on his own wife, while the songs that actually said something about who he was quietly disappeared from the set list. Billy Paul spent 20 years becoming an artist, and the next 40 being reduced to a single scandal that wasn't even his own story. His most historically important work never got the airplay his one crossover hit did, because America was always more comfortable with a fictional affair than an uncomfortable truth.
Me and Mrs. Jones.
Billy Paul got buried under his own scandal. Our next artist got buried under someone else's fame entirely. A label mate the whole world remembers, on a label that let her disappear.
We got a thing.
Number 8, Ann Peebles, I Can't Stand the Rain.
That I just can't stand. I can't stand the
Memphis, 1973. The sky opens without warning, the way it does in the South, and a young singer standing outside her apartment, dressed for a concert she's about to miss, snaps at the clouds without thinking. 2 words, I can't stand the rain. By morning, those 2 words are a song.
rain against my window pane.
Ann Peebles grew up singing in her father's church choir in St. Louis, performing in nightclubs under his careful supervision as a teenager, before Memphis producer Willie Mitchell signed her to High Records, the same label, same building, same production team behind a man named Al Green. Peebles was every bit his equal. She never got a fraction of his fame.
Rain against my window.
The song took 1 sleepless night to finish. Her partner Don Bryant and a local DJ helped turn her outburst into lyrics. And Mitchell built the track around a brand new gadget called an electric timbal, engineering a raindrop sound that had never existed on a record before. It reached the top 10 on the R&B chart. It's ranked at number 197 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time. It's been covered by Tina Turner, by Seal, sampled by Missy Elliott on her very first solo single in 1997.
Rain against my will.
Here's the twist that turns this into a painful truth. 5 years later, a disco cover by the group Eruption spent 2 weeks at #1 in Belgium and cracked the top 10 across Europe and Australia. A bigger commercial footprint than Peebles ever got from the song she wrote out of pure frustration on a rained-out evening. Her label mate Al Green became a global icon, a Hall of Famer, a name every casual fan can recite. Peebles became a songwriter's songwriter, a name serious collectors whisper with reverence, while the woman who actually lived that Memphis night kept performing in relative obscurity for the rest of her career.
Rain against.
The sound Ann Peebles created out of pure frustration became so foundational it outgrew her entirely. Sampled, covered, and canonized by artists who got far more famous performing her words than she ever got originating them.
Get me on another day.
Ann Peebles turned one ruined evening into an accidental anthem. Our next artist turned the nightly news into one. On purpose, alone, with nothing but an organ and a drum machine. Number 7, Timmy Thomas, Why Can't We Live Together?
Wants to live together. Why can't we live together?
Miami, 1972. A small apartment, a black and white television throwing pale light across the room. Walter Cronkite's voice, reading the day's Vietnam body count, like it's just another item on the evening news. One of 12 children raised in Evansville, Indiana, Timmy Thomas listens to the number, and something in him breaks open. That many mothers' children, gone today, and still no one will sit down and talk it out. He reaches for a phrase, why can't we live together?
Just a little peace in this world.
By morning, Thomas had written and recorded the entire song alone, just his voice, a Lowry organ, and one of the first drum machines ever used on a hit record, laid down in mono at a small studio in North Miami. The label's staff producer heard the stripped-down demo and made the decision that defined it forever. He left it exactly as it was. No band, no polish.
Wants to live together. Why can't we live together?
Why Can't We Live Together hit #1 R&B, climbed to #3 on the Hot 100 in early 1973, sold over 2 million copies, and reached #12 in the UK. A bare, minimalist protest standing shoulder to shoulder with What's Going On and War. Thomas spent the rest of his career chasing that feeling again. A record executive once told him, bluntly, that his biggest song had said something so true, nothing he made afterward could ever top it.
You want to steal my brother?
Here's the part almost nobody talks about. In 1982, a European producer released an unauthorized disco version built on pieces of Thomas's original tape. Thomas sued and won, in a ruling that forced a full re-record and became one of the earliest legal precedents involving unauthorized sampling, years before sampling lawsuits defined hip-hop. That instinct to protect his sound is exactly why, when Drake sampled the original on 2015's Hotline Bling, introducing that organ and that plea to a generation who'd never heard of him, the rights were already Thomas's to license.
Why can't we live together?
Millions of people now know Timmy Thomas's sound by heart without knowing his name. A fingerprint born from real grief over a war he had no power to stop, sampled by one of the biggest pop stars alive 43 years later. While Thomas himself spent decades chasing a second hit, a record executive told him could never come.
Everybody wants to live together.
Timmy Thomas built his hit alone, on purpose, out of grief. Our next voice didn't build hers at all. She just happened to answer when the industry finally came looking. Number 6. Jean Knight, Mr. Big Stuff.
You are Mr. Big Stuff.
New Orleans, late 1969. Flour on her hands, the smell of an industrial oven, a radio playing somewhere in the back of a university cafeteria kitchen. Jean Knight is baking bread for Loyola students who have no idea the woman behind the counter is about to become one of the biggest voices in the country, almost by accident.
My love, oh yeah, you're higher.
A friend stops her on the street while she's walking to pay a light bill. A producer is looking for her. She goes almost as a favor and cuts a playful, strutting song called Mr. Big Stuff at a studio in Jackson, Mississippi. Nobody in the industry knows what to do with it. It sits on a shelf for the better part of a year before Stax Records finally releases it in 1971, and it explodes. Number 2 pop, number 1 R&B, double platinum, a Grammy nomination that loses only to Aretha Franklin's Bridge Over Troubled Water, which, in a genre this deep, is still the kind of company that changes a life.
Mr. Big Stuff. You never
Except John Knight didn't write Mr. Big Stuff. She was paid once for the session, and because her name wasn't on the songwriting credit, the royalties that should have made her wealthy for life went somewhere else entirely. She was dropped from the label soon after and wouldn't release another record for 12 years.
Mr. Big Stuff. You never gonna get.
She kept touring anyway, on the strength of 3 minutes recorded almost by chance, through a surprise 1985 comeback with a cover of My Toot Toot, decades of festival stages across Louisiana. Then in 2005, Hurricane Katrina took her New Orleans home and everything inside it, and Jean Knight, whose voice had been inescapable on American radio for over 3 decades, spent a stretch of her life living out of a FEMA trailer.
You are Mr. Big Stuff.
The woman who sang Mr. Big Stuff never owned a piece of it. She earned a nursing degree in her 40s and worked as a nurse between tours just to make ends meet, while a song she recorded almost as a favor kept generating money for the men who wrote it, decades after it made her one of the most famous voices in the country.
In return, oh yeah. Now I know this is a lesson, Mr.
Number 5. Howard Tate, Get It While You Can. Camden, New Jersey, sometime in the 1980s. A man is walking 30 miles for $20, offering to wash cars, clean gutters, anything, just to get by one more day. He used to open for Marvin Gaye. He used to have a limousine waiting outside his house. Now soul music's most gifted lost voice is sleeping in the streets of a city he barely recognizes, and most people who once loved his records assume he's already dead.
When you love.
Howard Tate's voice was born in his father's Baptist church in Philadelphia, singing gospel alongside a young Garnet Mims. By 1966, fame arrived so fast it felt unreal. Tate came home from a day job to find a limousine parked outside, there to take him to open for Marvin Gaye the next night. Ain't Nobody Home, Look at Granny Run Run, and Stop all cracked the R&B Top 20. Then, in 1967, producer Jerry Ragavoy built him a song called Get It While You Can. It was a modest hit for Tate. 4 years later, it became a career-defining moment for a very different singer, when Janis Joplin's version landed on Pearl and turned it into a standard. Here's the twist. Jimi Hendrix covered Tate's Stop. B.B. King and Bonnie Raitt both covered Ain't Nobody Home. By his own account decades later, Tate never saw real money from any of it, because black artists of his era worked without the protections that came for others afterward. He walked away from music in the 1970s and sold insurance to support 6 children. Then, in 1976, his 13-year-old daughter died in a house fire. His marriage collapsed under the weight of it. He turned to cocaine to numb a grief he couldn't otherwise carry, and spent roughly a decade homeless on the streets of Camden, certain he was simply waiting to be found dead in an alley somewhere. In 1994, he checked himself into rehab. He got sober. He became a preacher, counseling addicts out of living rooms in South Jersey. In 2001, a chance supermarket encounter, a former member of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes recognizing a face soul music had given up on, led a local DJ straight to him. Tate stepped back on a stage that spring for the first time in decades, and his voice somehow was still completely intact. He'd record and tour for another decade before he died in 2011, at 72. Howard Tate wrote the blueprint for hits that turned other, more famous artists into legends, was paid almost nothing for it, lost a daughter, and lost a decade to addiction and homelessness, and still found his way back to a microphone with his falsetto untouched by any of it. Not every story on this list ends in tragedy. This is the one that didn't. It very nearly did. Howard Tate found his way back from the edge, at the very last possible moment. Our next artist never got that chance. Someone else decided his story was over, and there was nothing he could do about it. Number 4, Darrell Banks, Open the Door to Your Heart. Detroit, the night of February 24th, 1970. A man waits outside a house on the city's west side for a woman who has already moved on, with no idea that in the next few minutes, one of the finest voices in soul music will be gone forever. Not from a stage, not from the slow grind of the industry, but from a gun. Darrell Banks was born Darrell Eubanks to an unwed teenage mother in Ohio, raised by his grandparents, and found his voice the way so many soul singers did, in church, long before secular music entered the picture. In 1966, a song called Open the Door to Your Heart turned him into a star, climbing to number 2 on the R&B chart and number 27 pop. Here's the twist almost nobody remembers. Banks didn't write it. His friend and fellow singer Donnie Elbert did, under a different title, before Banks sped up the tempo, changed the name, and put his own name on the credits alone. It took a court battle to force a 50-50 split. The only writing credit Banks held in his life, contested from the start. Darling, you've been so sweet to me. His career slowed through the late 60s. He signed to Stax, cut one more album, kept performing around Detroit. On that February night in 1970, Banks confronted his girlfriend Marjorie Bozeman and the off-duty policeman she'd secretly been seeing. A gun came out. Banks was shot in the neck and chest and died within hours. He was 32. Walk right on in. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Michigan for over 30 years, until fans of Britain's northern soul scene, where Open the Door to Your Heart had become a sacred anthem decades after it left American radio, tracked down his unmarked plot in the early 2000s and raised the money themselves for a headstone. In 2014, a single surviving pressing of Open the Door to Your Heart sold at a UK auction for roughly $23,000, believed to be the most expensive soul single ever sold. More money changed hands over one physical copy of Darrell Banks's voice than the man likely earned in his entire recording career, decades after strangers overseas had to pay for the gravestone his own country never gave him.
Why don't you give it sight?
Darrell Banks lost his life to someone else's rage in a single unforgivable moment. Our next artist lost himself more slowly. A name, an identity, an entire country erased one careful decision at a time, just to stay alive. Number 3. Arthur Conley. Sweet Soul Music. A quiet village in the Netherlands called Ruurlo, decades after the fact. A man in his 50s runs a small music promotion company. Going by a name almost nobody around him would connect to a song that once conquered radio on 2 continents. His neighbors know him as Lee Roberts. Almost none of them know he used to be Arthur Conley. In 1967, Conley was barely 21, personally mentored by Otis Redding, who discovered him on a demo tape, signed him as the first artist to his own label, and sat with him in Muscle Shoals to rework an old Sam Cooke song into something new. Sweet Soul Music, a joyous roll call naming Lou Rawls, James Brown, Sam and Dave, Wilson Pickett, reached number 2 on both the pop and R&B charts, went gold, sold over 1 million copies, and hit number 1 in parts of Europe. Here's the devastating turn almost nobody talks about. Months later, Otis Redding died in a plane crash, and Conley, by his own rare admission years afterward, never fully processed the loss. He kept charting through the late 60s, but without Redding's guidance, the hits grew smaller. Underneath all of it sat a secret Conley had carried his entire career. He was gay, in an industry and an era where that truth, if it surfaced, could end everything he'd built. By the mid-1970s, Conley had quietly left the United States, London first, then Belgium, then Amsterdam, chasing room to breathe. In 1980, he made it permanent, legally changing his name to Lee Roberts and settling in Ruurlo, where, for the first time in his adult life, he could exist without performing a version of himself for anyone. Arthur Conley died there in November 2003, of cancer, at 57, under a name most of his American fans never knew was his. The man who wrote a song immortalizing nearly every major name in soul music never got to hear his own name shouted back at him the way Otis Redding's or James Brown's still is today. He spent the second half of his life anonymous by design, because the industry that celebrated sweet soul music never made room for the man who actually sang it. Arthur Conley had years to plan his own disappearance. Our next artist had no warning at all, no time to say goodbye, no time to plan anything. Number 2, Linda Jones, Hypnotized. The Apollo Theater, March 14, 1972. The matinee show has just ended, flawless, no sign of anything wrong, and 27-year-old Linda Jones heads to her mother's house in Newark to rest before the evening performance. She's been diabetic since childhood, down to 1 kidney, but she's never let it slow her down, not through a national tour, not through 2 decades of performing since she was a 6-year-old singing in her family's gospel group. She lies down for a quick nap. She never gets back up. Jones bounced between small labels for years before Hypnotized broke into the R&B top 10 in 1967, built around a voice critics still call one of the most dramatic in the history of soul. The kind of singer who could start a song at a climax and somehow keep climbing. By 1972, Married to her childhood sweetheart and signed to a fresh label deal, she was in the middle of a real comeback. Her cover of For Your Precious Love reached number 15 R&B, her biggest hit in 5 years. Witnesses from that final Apollo run remember her dropping to her knees mid-performance the night before she died, wiping out an entire room nobody there would ever forget. Here's the part that turns this from a tragedy into a painful truth. Jones had taken her insulin as usual that afternoon. What she hadn't done, because there wasn't time between a matinee and an evening show at one of the most demanding venues in American music, was eat properly. Her mother went to wake her for the second performance and found her unconscious. She never made it back to the stage.
Just one little look into your
Linda Jones didn't die from excess, or scandal, or violence. She died from the ordinary, invisible math of an industry that booked 2 shows in one day and never once asked whether a chronically ill 27-year-old's body could survive the gap between them.
yours to command and war.
Linda Jones never saw it coming. Our number one artist did. She saw it coming for 3.5 years and kept singing anyway. Number 1. Minnie Riperton, Lovin' You.
Love with you is all I want.
A stage, sometime in 1978. The lights are warm, and Minnie Riperton is singing the song that made her famous. The one about how loving someone is easy because they're beautiful. Except her right arm hangs motionless at her side, frozen by a swelling she can no longer hide. In the final seconds, where the melody simply repeats a name into the fade, she isn't singing lyrics anymore. Those close to her say she's saying her children's names instead. Maya, Maya, Ringo, Maya. Nobody in the crowd screaming her hit back at her has any idea they're listening to a goodbye.
Loving you is easy.
Riperton grew up the youngest of 8 children on Chicago's South Side, trained in opera as a girl, gifted with a 5-octave range so rare that decades later, Mariah Carey would credit her as the reason she ever tried singing in the whistle register herself. She started as a teenage backup singer behind Etta James and Chuck Berry, drifted into semi-retirement as a young mother in Florida, and was rediscovered almost by accident when a college intern found an old demo tape. Lovin' You, from the gold-certified album Perfect Angel and co-produced by Stevie Wonder, hit number 1 on April 5, 1975.
I see your soul come
9 months later, in January 1976, doctors told Minnie Riperton she had breast cancer that had already spread through her lymphatic system and gave her 6 months to live.
We'll live each day in springtime. 'Cause
Here's the twist that turns admiration into heartbreak. She lived 3.5 more years, almost entirely in public. She became one of the first celebrities in America to openly discuss a breast cancer diagnosis, at a time the disease was still spoken about only in whispers. She became a spokeswoman for the American Cancer Society, received its Courage Award from President Jimmy Carter at the White House in 1978, and kept recording and touring even as the disease slowly took her right arm. On July 12, 1979, at 10 in the morning, she died in her husband's arms, listening to a recording Stevie Wonder had made just for her. She was 31.
love with you is all I want.
For the final years of her life, every time Minnie Riperton sang the song that made her a star, she may have been quietly saying goodbye to her children in front of audiences who thought they were just hearing a love song.
Stay with me while we grow old and we
Most people who love this song don't know any of that. Don't know she was already dying the last time she sang it live.
Loving you has made.
Don't know the names in that fade out belong to her own children. Don't know that loving you is easy, because you're beautiful is carved on her headstone in Los Angeles. The last words she left anywhere in her own voice.
Day of my life is filled with love.
They just know the song. Now you know the woman. And her daughter, Maya Rudolph, grew up to spend her own career making the world laugh, carrying that same warmth forward into a spotlight her mother never got to see her stand in.
Loving you is easy.
10 voices, one song each, and somehow that was enough to outlive every industry that tried to bury them. These records were never just hits. They were letters mailed to a version of you that hadn't been born yet, sealed in 1967, in 1972, in 1975, arriving decades later, right on time, exactly when you needed to hear them.
You are Mr. Big Star.
Tell us in the comments which one hit you hardest. Subscribe. Because R&B Revealed uncovers a new one every week, and we are not done. Not even close. There are more voices buried in the vault, more names the industry tried to erase. The music never lies, even when the industry does.
Ooh, I'm more in love with you.
I can't stand the rain against my window, 'cause he's not here with me.